very quick intro, but I'll just do it right down here.
All right.
Yeah.
Sounds groovy.
You might need to have your mics closer to you.
Oh.
I don't know, we're all school teachers, we're pretty loud.
We can shout.
Pretty loud, yeah.
All right.
All right, thanks everyone for coming out for a special final Thursday reading series, part of this season that is sponsored by the UNI Sesquicentennial Committee as part of the 150th anniversary of the University of Northern Iowa. Really pleased to do something we've never tried before, so this is going to be a live recording of an episode of podcast. We think we can do it. We'll find out at the end whether or not it actually works. So wish us all luck. I want to thank Grant Tracey, as you all know, a colleague here at University of Northern Iowa, bringing in a couple friends, Ted Morrissey and Brady Harrison. Let's hear it for them.
All right, thank you, Jim O'Loughlin, for the invitation to join you for final Thursday reading series. Yeah, I'm Ted Morrissey, and this is the podcast, A Lesson Before Writing, episode 28, or as Brady likes to call it, episode 993 or something. But we've been at this for about 3 years or so, and so we're going to do a little bit different format tonight. I'm here obviously with Grant Tracey, author of the Hayden Fuller Mystery Series, and this is book 4, which came out about a month ago or so, a couple months ago. And then Brady's newest book, A Journey to Al Ramel, his debut novel. His story collection, A Term Between, is over there, winner of the High Plains Book Award. And I've got a couple of books over there myself, but I'll plug my forthcoming collection of poetry, Aspiring Child, a biography of Mary W. Shelley in science. So I've been spending basically this past year either with Frankenstein or Dracula. So I'm really in my wheelhouse tonight for this. So yeah, normally what we do, we just chit-chat for about 50 minutes. Our tagline is writers, editors, publishers, and teachers talking about writing, editing, publishing, and teaching. That's what we do. And then the last 30 minutes or so, normally we have a featured story, which is a story from a very recently published literary journal that we've picked out and we've read it beforehand, and so we spent about a half hour kind of talking about it, talking about the author's technique and just all kinds of stuff. Very free form, very low tech, not quite as low as tonight, but no, I'm just kidding. But no, we just have a lot of fun with it. We've been doing it now for 3 years. We get together once a month. I will plug very quickly, we just posted a couple of bonus episodes 6 and 7. Bonus episode 6 is these two characters reading from their new books with some Q&A at the end, which was really terrific. And then just a couple days after that, I'd asked Brady to interview Grant for an interview about his Hayden Fuller series, and they Zoom recorded their interview conversation, not intending for it to be uploaded as a podcast episode, but when I saw it, it was so fantastic, I twisted their arm. So bonus episode 7 is a really cool, informal, behind-the-scenes talk between two great writers who are dedicated to their craft, and I think you really get a kick out of both of those bonus episodes. All right? So I don't want to take up too much more time here, although I am feeling pretty nostalgic because when we went out to dinner, we passed Cup of Joe Cafe downtown, and it brings back fond memories of when I poached Grant from his previous publisher back in 2015. So I just got all warm and fuzzy when I saw that. So we decided that what we do is maybe talk for about a half hour or so, and then hopefully have about 10 or 15 minutes for questions. So while we're chit-chatting, if you want to think about some questions for us, we'd love to have that. And so without further ado, we thought we might talk about vampires, at least to get started. I kind of threw that out there. And I'm just going to open it up. When I tossed out that idea a couple days ago, Brady, did you have any initial thoughts in terms of what we might talk about in terms of vampires?
I did, and I thought in the first place, what sexy beasts vampires are, which of course reminded me of my co-hosts.
Which is why we're so close together.
We don't normally, we're all in different geographical regions when we're doing our podcast. And so what's important to know is that usually over Ted's shoulder is a picture of William Gass,
Yep.
which a famous American writer. And so basically most of the podcast is Grant and I making fun of Ted's admiration for William Gass. And so,
And me cutting them off whenever they start to talk about hockey, because that's just going to be the whole episode then.
yeah. I say these things to give you some sense of what it is we actually do in our podcast. But vampires. So my interest in this is perhaps like many of you, like we sort of grow up on vampire stories, or we like vampire movies, we like Dracula. My interest has extended to teaching a course on the Gothic and the Brontes. And so I do a couple of Bronte novels, and we read Dracula, and we read the originary Gothic tale, The Castle of Otranto. And what really interests me, I mean, I love those books, I reread them happily all the time. But what I like about vampire stories are the rules of the genre. Like, what are the rules that govern your ability to deal with the vampire? They don't get to go out at night. You have to put a stake through their heart. There's some silver or garlic. Whatever it is, part of what I love about the vampire genre are those rules, because you have to navigate that cosmology, that epistemology, that ontology, in order to be able to deal with them. And so part of the fun of the discovery, besides vampires are sexy beasts, besides their faded aristocracy, beside the great Gothic settings, how do you deal with them? What are the rules? And so part of what our purpose in the podcast has been is to see if we can't, as experienced writers, give some practical advice. So if you're going to write vampire stories, what are the rules?
Good point. Grant,
Yeah.
you're up.
Okay.
Wisdom, if you will.
Okay, well, I will try not to bloviate, but yes, vampires. I think this applies to all genres, but one of the things that, there's an article that was written in the 70s that I've used for years, and so I'm just going to share it with you all pretty quickly, by John G. Coelty, called, I think it's Generic Transformation in Chinatown. And he basically looks at Chinatown and looks at all the ways it breaks the rules and reinforces the rules of what a detective story is. Now, let's slide into vampires. So what is this paradigm? He comes up with 4 types of stories, and I think you can, as writers, take these 4 models and mix and match them as like gumbo. They don't need to be one or the other. So one is burlesque, where you parody the rules, all right? So Shadow of a Vampire, for example, is in some ways burlesque, because you got these filmmakers, and they're kind of making fun of authenticity, well, making fun of the characters who are into authentic cinema, and they think that Nosferatu is such an incredible method actor, but no, he's a freaking vampire. But no, the other characters, can't quite figure that out, so they're talking about his craft, and he actually, wants to suck people's blood and kill them. So that's really, and then John Malkovich as Murnau, and he's definitely over the top, kind of an Orson Welles type director. And the truth has to be on film, so a little bit of Jean-Luc Godard, the truth, 24 frames a second. So anyway, that's burlesque. And then there's nostalgia, which is what Steven Spielberg has mastered for years, where you take old genres and you come back to them and just, you love them. So like the whole Indiana Jones stuff, certain Westerns, you don't really play that much with the form. You just, I have better technology and I have a bigger budget and I'm gonna make a heck of a Western, right? And then there's demythologization, which is my personal favorite, which is you deconstruct some of the rules of the genre. And it's not just you put a female character in as a superhero. If you put a female character in as the superhero, then you've got to do something more than that, like within the genre. Like, what makes this unique besides you just flip the gender? What are you doing with the storytelling? It's not just about positive images. It's about telling that story from that perspective. So like a movie like Sinners, where it's a vampire film, but we're getting inside the Black experience, which is unlike vampire films I've seen, many of them, and it empathizes with exiles. It's a film about endurance and survival, and there's a scene, a long take scene. It's almost like you go through a portal about midway through the film where it's futuristic, Afrofuturism, where you have past, present, and future all blended together. You've got sort of a Jimi Hendrix type guitarist mixed with blues guitar with a DJ spinning records. It's super cool. So to me, that's demythologization. And Nosferatu, the Eggers film, where you take a classic vampire story and you make it female-centered. Johnny Depp's daughter, I'm sorry, I can't remember her name, I just know it's Johnny Depp's daughter, but thank you. And she has this prior relationship with Nosferatu, and it's like, then suddenly we're in her perspective. She's not just there as a sacrificial figure to save everybody. It's like, it's this whole story about her, and about 40% way into the movie, it flips. Like, you think it's going to be the dude, the guy that played Lex Luthor, I can't remember the actor's name. He's really good as Lex Luthor, but that cat, and you think it's his story, and then suddenly it's hers. But if you watch the movie carefully, you see from the beginning it's going to be her story. And then the last one is demythologization, but then you basically reaffirm the myth. So that'd be like the Wild Bunch. You got a bunch of assholes. Sorry, I can say that here. A bunch of assholes, and they're coarse, and you don't like them, and at the end they all get killed. But somehow,
Yeah, but we like William Holden.
yeah.
It doesn't matter. We like William Holden.
Okay. Anyway, I'm digging through my eyeballs here. But you get these guys, but at the end, there's something about the toxic masculinity that becomes honorable in the eyes of Sam Peckinpah, and somehow it uplifts this heroic grand gesture. I don't buy this theory, but I'd say this is a way to read the ending of the film. The Searchers, John Wayne's a racist. In the novel, he gets killed off, but in the movie, Ford makes him somewhat heroic, and at the end, although he's rejected and not allowed into the community, he's affirmed in some strange way as Ethan Edwards. So that John Ford does that a lot in his films. He seems to demythologize the Western, but he basically affirms. So that's the Ford, and you all can take any of those, mix them up, and do what you want. So that would be one of the first things I would do if I was approaching a vampire story. What am I doing that's new? What am I doing that's old? And how am I, playing with these conventions? Sorry, it's a long-winded answer. I won't say anything for 5 minutes.
That's all right. No, that's great. That's great. No, it's so interesting that the vampire, kind of our more modern sense of the vampire, really began in like the 18th century. Obviously, depending on how elastic you want your definition of vampirism to be, you can go back, centuries, millennia. But certainly in the 1700s, they were starting to talk about vampires the way we tend to think of them. And yet here we are in the 21st century, and we're still very much focused on them. Not just vampires, but other kind of monsters. I'll just have to mention, is it Guillermo del Toro? Is that the director? Yeah. Who's having, like next month, a brand new Frankenstein is dropping on Netflix, I believe it is. So remaking that film yet again. But I think that's the fascinating thing about these monsters, whether it's a vampire or Frankenstein's creature kind of monster, or whatever it is that they are enduring. They come back and they're modernized, they're contemporized. I've been all about the vampire for the last few months, and Rousseau talked about vampires as like the aristocracy of his time, and they were bleeding the commoner, of their wealth, to feather their own nests and that kind of thing. Well, obviously, it wouldn't take a lot of updating to think about 21st century America and talk about tech billionaires who are vampirically bleeding the rest of us. Oh, sorry. Wait, did this get cut out? Where'd our Wi-Fi go? But, and then the other thing which is really fascinating, there's a kind of a tradition in vampire narratives of vampires bleeding the creativity from artistic types, whether they're writers, artists, painters, and oh my gosh, hello AI, right? Artificial intelligence, literally kind of bleeding and start taking our very lifeblood in terms of our words, our images, our music, whatever it is, and just reappropriating it without any sort of royalties or any sort of credit or whatever. So I think there are so many ways that these kind of classical monster types are still very relevant and adaptable into the way we're thinking about our current times. I don't know, Brady, do you have any sense of that, the contemporary kind of, realization of the classic monster motifs in your Gothic classes? Do you talk about like 21st century America and how it may be represented in some ways with the Brontes or with Stoker or something?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we talk about, my daughter and I have the habit of every Christmas, and I'm sure that you have the same habit, but we watch over the Christmas season all the Alien movies. You must also do that because it's fun. Yeah, so I mean, the Gothic and monster stories, yes, certainly are alive and well. And I don't know how many people in this room found themselves party to the lawsuit over the AI. Anybody getting a paycheck in the mail? Do you know what I'm talking about? When the AI has consumed all those works, there's a list of the books that they have uploaded, and if your book is one of those, it's part of a class action suit. So
Wow.
yeah, you may yet be rich. Yeah, I suspect not going to get rich out of that. One of the abiding questions, I'm not going to, part of the fun of the podcast is we talk back and forth and then we ignore one another's questions. And so what Ted asked is interesting, and I'll kick it back over to Grant, but one of the things that I like to wonder about vampire stories and vampire films is the question of why do we like them? What kick do we get? So hands up, anybody a fan of vampire movies or vampire books? Yeah, but why? Why do we like somebody biting somebody else on the neck? And so when teaching these works, often draw on well-established psychological models. Like, what does it tell about us that we're interested in the vampires, or Frankenstein won't go away? Why do those persist with us? And so some of the works that I think about and that have been influential for me, Julia Kristeva's work on abjection, those things that are, what is it we like about monsters? Well, they are expressions in the world. They are projections of the things that we are unsettled about in ourselves. Is that the kick we get? Because we recognize them, which leads very nicely into Freud's notion of the uncanny. Those things are not us, but aren't they kind of like us? And so, yeah, what is the kick? And particularly, and I open my remarks along these lines, there's something, is there not, that vampires seem to have something to do with human sexuality and desire.
What?
Yes.
I never noticed that.
And we can talk about that, but we can't talk about tech billionaires and other things. Yeah, so what I like is the abiding interest is why do we like it? Why do we continue from Bram Stoker but way back to ancient Irish folk tales, there are vampires. Why is it persistent? What does it do for us? Why do we still want to read those books, see those movies? Right,
yeah. Grant, any thoughts on?
I'll keep it brief. Two things. One, I mean, this is obvious, but we haven't gone there. There is something religious about the whole thing, the blood of Christ, eating the body of Christ, and all of the blood stuff that's in vampire stories. So there's a kind of connection with Christianity, and wherever you want to go with that, please go. The other thing is, I'm trying to articulate this, but one of the things I like about Sinners, and I'm sorry to keep coming back to it, but I just think it's one of the best movies for the last 30 years. In Ryan Coogler's Sinners, I feel like it positions the audience in a different perspective in that the monster isn't othered. So much of monster movies, we empathize with the monsters, but they're also kind of seen through I don't want to say colonial gaze, but they're somewhat othered. And Coogler's film, I feel we're in the position of the black community in that film, and even Ramick and his group of followers, there's a sort of an empathy for all of them, and they're all survivors of some kind, and they're all exiles of some kind. So for me, there's some really new ground being broken with that film that just feels different to me than a lot of the other vampire tales. And I keep calling it a horror vampire film, even though I know it's like a gangster film and it's like a Western. But I think it's predominantly a horror vampire movie.
One of the, yeah, I'll just jump in. This is the other thing we do, is jump in and talk. We don't, try not to let Ted talk. That's always
It's
fair.
best that way.
Yeah. So just listening to what Grant is saying has called to mind the vampire movie, and there's a couple of versions. There's, I think, maybe a Swedish original and an American remake, and I like them both. Let the Right One In. Anybody seen this? There's something. It's a really smart revision. Sort of go back to Grant's schema of 4. It's a really great revision, but it's somehow help me out here. It's oddly tender. Like there's a kind of emotional sense of loss and the problem of aging. Some very human grief kinds of problems enter into a vampire story, and it involves children, so it has extra kinds of levels of creepiness.
Yeah, and Sinners for me, I think it's gonna sound weird, it's a hopeful movie. And it's a horror film, but to me it's hopeful, and there's a kind of, not just redemption, but transcendence at the end with the guy that survives. He comes out, he's got all this smoke on his body.
No spoilers.
Oh shit, sorry, okay, I won't say anything else. I just, like, it plays with the genre in so many different ways, and, you know, there's, yeah, to me it's a very hopeful film. Yeah, anyway.
Well, you know, and I think that it's something I wanted to get to in the little bit of time that we have before we want to open it up for questions, and it really is, your guys' comments, you know, segue into this nicely, I think, is that it doesn't have to be for writers an all or nothing proposition. In other words, you don't have to say, okay, I'm just going to write a horror story, I'm going to follow certain tropes, etc. I'm really into like cross-genre writing. And so, yeah, I have monstrous figures in my books and ghostly figures, but they're not the main focus. I mean, they kind of play in there. I like to think of myself as sort of in the Toni Morrison school of ghosts. You know, I mean, so many of her novels have ghosts in them. I mean, Beloved is obviously the best known, but you don't think of them as horror stories. I mean, she's using ghosts to represent a kind of cultural trauma, historical trauma, personal trauma, or whatever it might be. And so I think, like, for my students, I encourage them to think about bringing, like, Gothic elements in or supernatural elements into what otherwise would be, you know, a fairly straightforward story. And I think I kind of caught Brady off guard a couple of episodes ago because we were talking about, or I guess it was, there's an interview with Brady in the paperback edition, also an afterword by another writer in the paperback edition. But I think I caught him off guard with one of the questions because it's a story set in like the 1930s in Morocco. It's a travel narrative, that kind of thing. But it's also got some really interesting Gothic elements. And so I asked him about that, and he was like, what? Gothic elements? But I think his love of the Gothic, and all these years teaching Gothic, reading Gothic, that those elements seeped into what is otherwise, you know, not really what he intended to be, a horror story or a Gothic narrative or whatever. But boy, does it add an interesting layer to the narrative that I think really, you know, packs a punch. And maybe because it's snuck in so subtly that even the author didn't realize it was getting in there until I pointed it out. So do you want to maybe talk about that a little bit, the integrating of elements of the Gothic with otherwise non-Gothic storytelling?
Yeah, we've been talking about this over the course of our podcast. Should you, if you are a traditional storyteller, if you tell realist kinds of tales, should you nonetheless introduce experimental touches to add to the complexity, to put some pressure on the reader? And so we've been talking about how do you mix genres, how do you mix elements, and then Ted poses this question to me as he just described, and it totally put me back on my heels. I teach Gothic literature, I teach monster fiction, and then I didn't realize I was writing in part, so what goes on? And so for me, the fun of Ted's question, and the fun of writing parts of the book, was we don't know where things come from, and we don't know how deep the hooks of the things we like, how deep they can get into us, and then how they find expression back out. So part of what we've talked about all along the way, and I like how Ted says this, that when you're writing stuff, don't hold the wheel too tightly. Let those wells of imagination and the kinds of things you love, and don't try to regulate yourself. Let it see what can bubble up and be open to mixing things. So for me, it was such a fun question. And at the same time, I was going, how come I didn't know I was writing a Gothic novel? Like, shouldn't I have known that?
Yeah. You know where I got a lot of that about not holding the wheel too tightly? William Gass.
William Gass.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when Ted says that, because we're such a high-tech podcast, whenever Ted brings up William Gass, flames shoot across the stage, and there's also a gong sound. So you have to imagine that, but in our fully produced,
Right.
yeah.
Well, you know, another thing that I think is really great about our podcast connection, I don't know if listeners think it's great, but we get a lot out of it. I mean, we get all kinds of ideas from each other. We have even infected Grant with the Gothic, because the Hayden Fuller novel he's going to work on is 5 Points of Evil.
Death.
Oh, 5 Points of Death.
Yeah.
Sorry. You know, and so he's going to bring
The
in
pentagram.
some supernatural elements into Hayden Fuller.
Yeah. And,
You know, a little hockey, a little supernatural stuff going on.
well, and I think crime writing, there is something metaphorically vampiric in the fact that, I don't think capitalism works. Surprise, surprise, that's just my feeling. And I think it exploits people. And so there's always that level of exploitation going on, either by criminals or others. And that's a kind of sucking the life out of individuals. So the gangsters, and they don't care about people. They're, you know, exploiting. And there's predators, especially, you know, chasing after younger folks. So the whole haze of, I didn't think of myself as, I wouldn't say I'm not into Gothic, but I think of myself as more a noir guy. But within noir, there's some overlap with sort of the dark underbelly of society that's also, I think, in the Gothic. So those genres come together. And so for the next book, I am going to have Hayden take on a bunch of cultists who are into Satanic Majesties by request, not the Rolling Stone album, but yeah, and they are they're killing people on a certain day of every month because they believe that brings up this Dionysian force from the universe that makes things that they want come true, and those things do come true, and there's actually a demon in the story. So yeah, you guys have had influence.
Well, you know, I'm gonna embarrass Grant here, but one of the things I love about the Hayden
I don't
Fuller,
think you can do that.
yeah, watch me. One of the things I love about the Hayden Fuller Mysteries and why I'm so proud to be their publisher is, I mean, Grant's got a formula. You know, all noir has a certain, you know, formula, a number of tropes. But every book, even though you've got Hayden and you've got, you know, usually set in Toronto, one of the books is set in Montreal. But, you know, there's obviously some very standard stock there that Grant is drawing from. But yet, every book, he pushes himself to find new stuff to do, a new structure, you know, new metaphors to play with. And so, like, the next book that's going to come out called Acts is actually a integrated set of novellas, which are all working together, something he hasn't done before. And so he's always pushing himself and always pushing his genre just to be a little bit more interesting, a little bit more innovative. And he doesn't have to. Hell, I'll keep publishing them forever. But I really admire that. And I think we all can take a lesson from that. You know, we get kind of in our comfort zone, I think, as writers. And it really takes a lot to kind of push ourselves out of that and to try new things and to see if it's going to work or if it's not going to work.
Yeah, like Steinbeck's one of my favorite writers, and I've always admired that about him is, you know, he'll do something in Dubious Battle, which is sort of just a proletarian novel, you know, and then he'll do something like A Mice and Men, a really short novella, and then he does something like, you know, Sweet Thursday and Cannery Row, which are lighter hearted, but still, you know, and then you got the classic, you know, Grapes of Wrath, and then you got East of Eden, and you know, he's all over the Pearl, a kind of parable. He's just constantly not satisfied with producing the same book, and that's kind of the way I love detective stories, but I want to keep pushing the boundaries and trying some different things. So appreciate what you said, Ted. Thanks.
So I think we're getting close to hoping you have some questions, but while you're maybe pondering that for a minute or two, let me kind of kick it around one last time. We always kind of do a last round of just sort of final reflections. And Brady, do you have any kind of final thoughts you'd like to share with us? Maybe kind of briefly, because we are running up against that time we want to leave for Q&A.
Yes, so because I pride myself on having really deep insights at the end of each episode, when Grant was talking about the last book, I kind of heard the first time he was telling Ted and I about it, I heard the 5 Fingers of Death, so I thought he was writing a Hayden Fuller kung fu epic. It would be like just chopping that, anyway, so I was a little
Don't give him any ideas.
Yeah,
I'm liking that.
I was a little heartbroken when it found out that had to do with cults and stuff. But in maybe of somewhat more use, one of the great things in our conversations, and we already said this tonight, but it's true, like learn from your friends, listen to one another, be open, who knows what you can create, and have fun, right? This is one of the fun jobs in life, right? There are jobs that are not fun. This is fun.
Grant, final thoughts?
Oh, wow. I look like your little brother on that camera.
Yeah,
sort of about
that's
the
not something that normally
forced
happens.
Perspective here.
Yeah.
Like,
Is
that us?
I look like Beaver Cleaver. This is Wally, and that's Dad over there. Anyway, any final thoughts? We talked about this a lot on the podcast, but I love Jack Kerouac. I love the Beats. I'm a big fan of, even though it's mythical, this kind of, the myth that surrounds Kerouac, but I am a fan of following impulses and going where they go and see what happens, and don't be so structured. Let the impulses flow. Now, I think you have to write a lot to get to the place where you trust your impulses, because early in my career I had a lot of bad impulses, but now I just I don't always know where I'm going, and I just listen to that voice, or my character will say something, I'm like, okay, let's go there, and it takes me to nice, surprising places. So that would be my suggestion. Trust your impulses.
So I'll end with a Gas quote. He didn't teach creative writing because he didn't want to be burdened with reading really bad writing. So he said if he had any advice to give to young writers, it would be learn not to take advice. In other words, trust your own instincts. There's going to be a bunch of people out there criticizing, giving you their version of what you think you ought to be writing.
Yeah.
But you write you, and don't worry about the critics. Now, that may not help you in your typical workshopping situation. Listen to your professor at least for a while. Anyway, does anybody have any questions you'd like to throw out to any and all of us? Jim.
All right, I'll start with one.
Whoa, my goodness.
So there was a time not that long ago when it looked like the vampire genre had it seemed kind of permanently been taken over by Twilight, and by the whole series. And I remember someone saying there would be like a generation before anyone could write a vampire story and not have it be thinking about or reflecting in some way on Twilight. It hasn't been quite that long, but I'm wondering how you think about that in terms of how some of these genres have these kind of ebbs and flows in terms of what they can mean and how they resonate in the culture.
Yeah, I mean, some of those actors are like Robert Pattinson. Like, I think he's a terrific actor. I mean, I have no interest in Twilight, and my daughter was not of that generation.
I love him as Batman.
Yeah, well, I was raised on Harry Potter by my child, but there's. I mean, part of the interest, besides what do we get from these genres, is the persistence of them. And so, I mean, for a while it was all zombies, right? And they're easy targets because they're slow moving. But recently I watched, and this has been out for a while because I'm always late to catch on to things, but Midnight Mass, a Flanagan production, which is it's a little. One might take offense if they were Catholic, as one might with lots of horror movies. But I thought that show was terrific. I thought it was, I like the way he reuses actors, has a kind of company. And so that seemed to me like a really strong entry. And so that the genre, I deduced from the experience of watching that the genre is alive and well. And anybody out there ever read any Stephen King, say Salem's Lot? That book, I think, stays fresh. They're going to make a movie of it every 2 weeks, so another hit show or something. But yeah, so what kicks do we get? And then it must stay with us. There's something horrifying and frightening that must be permanent to our condition. That this genre does not go away. It just has become archetypal for us, or already was archetypal, and just persists. I don't think I even answered your question.
Well,
that's the other thing we do. Yeah, we just talk.
Well,
yeah.
Just to throw in my shekels here, I mean, I do think there's cycles to genres, like, you know, the 50s were the heyday and 60s of television westerns, and then they kind of died for a long time, and then suddenly they kind of came back. It wasn't just Clint and Unforgiven, but there's been a series of like reboots and rethinking. There's what's that one? Godless Gods. It's a bunch of women, mining town, and it was on like Netflix or something.
Well, there is
It's kind of Cormac McCarthy-esque.
Yes, and that's re-energizing. So, what I think there were critics that used to say, well, when a genre runs out, it goes to parody. And there's some truth to that, but I actually think we keep reinventing genres. That's why I know I've been pimping Sinners. Please go see the movie if you haven't seen it. Watch it today. But that film is like, for me, re-energizes the genre. So does Robert Eggers' Nosferatu. It takes a different spin on it, and it opens up different possibilities. And so I think there's ways in which something can get to be a dead end, but then it just takes some creative impulses to, let's take this in a fresh new direction. Because that's what it's all about, repetition and variation. What am I doing? If I'm tapping into the past, what am I doing that's new and exciting? Otherwise, it's just copycat, and that's boring.
Yeah, other questions? Yeah.
Okay, this is a lesson before writing. I want a lesson. We're talking about horror. How do you write scary? What are the challenges, but how do you write it? How do you get it to be scary? I've never succeeded.
Well, you know, I think understatement is a key. I mean, I think what we don't quite know is more unsettling and unnerving than, you know, a knifing in the parking lot or something. So, I mean, obviously there's not a set formula per se, but I think, as I mentioned, that implying the horror is much more effective than just putting it out there, right? And so I think that's at least part of it, is to, and I think thinking about what unsettles us. You know, it's kind of a little bit different tack, but I mean, you know, so many writers have talked about that if your text doesn't surprise you, then it's not going to surprise the reader. And I think it's very true of horror. If it doesn't unsettle you, if you're not looking over your shoulder a bit after you get done writing it, then probably it may not have the same effect on readers. So whatever scares you likely will scare some readers. I don't know, Brady, you?
Yeah, no, I think that's great, and I've been rereading for the occasion of our podcast with you, one of Ted's books, Crow Song for the Stricken, and it's unsettling because you can't tell what's quite going on. Like what is that creature? What are these people doing these plays? What is with this rather insular town? And so it's requiring us to sort of project ourselves. I think there's some kind of fright in that. Like, we're unsettled and we keep trying to figure things out. And the other thing I was thinking in response to your question, it seems like the realm of horror so much is the taboo. And so how do you talk about the taboo? How do you bring it to a reader's attention? That must be part of what frightens us, must be being brought up against the things we would otherwise not want to speak about. Bodily fluids. I'm in Faulkner. I'm teaching a course next semester on Faulkner. It seems like there's a few incest stories, right? I mean, the sort of darkest things, and somehow presenting them. Fright seems to be somewhere in that too. I can offer that. Not much of a lesson, but it's on my mind.
I was just going to add, like, I love the idea of understatement. I think that's important. I think a lot of students, when they're, you know, I hear this in workshop all the time. I want more gore. And I'm like, I don't need more gore. This is, the message is coming across loud and clear. But I can't tell you how many times I've heard that with horror writing. Give me more gore. So I like understatement, but I also like total breakdown. And I'm thinking of the writer Jim Thompson, who writes crime books, but I think he's one of the greatest writers of the 20th century. They called him the dime store Dostoevsky. And in his novel, A Hell of a Woman, at the end, the protagonist has a total breakdown, and Thompson wanted the publisher to have different colored font for the two different voices that the character's going through before he jumps through a window and dies. Sorry, spoilers.
Because Grant, we talked about this.
But it's that total breakdown for like 2 pages that just like makes my head explode. And I'm like, he dares to go there. And I think a lot of people didn't get it in the day. And now it's like it's a work of genius. And the ending of Getaway, I'm not going to give it all away, but it's like, forget the movie with the happy ending. They go to this island where all these criminals are hanging out, and as they run out of money, they are murdered. And so, I'm just smelling it now. Thompson has a smell of dead bodies in the air because of basically like Dachau or something that they get put in an oven because it's a whole place of criminals, and if you can't afford the rent, you don't. And that's kind of, it is incredible. But just that sort of being on the edge of like daring to write something like that. So on one hand, I'm saying understatement, and on the other hand, I'm saying over the top.
It's very helpful. Well, I'll just throw in, when Margaret Atwood wrote The Handmaid's Tale, which obviously is scary in many ways, she said that there's nothing in that book that wasn't already happening somewhere in the world. And so she just brought all these horrific dystopian elements together. So I think that's also important, that if we can see that we're right on the brink of whatever the horror is in the thing we're reading, then that's pretty scary too, right? So it's not some netherworld. I mean, I love the alien movies also, but I'm never traveling to any of those distant moons where the egg things are going to suck my face or whatever. So even though it's terrifying, it's not super realistic, right? But I think we maybe have time for maybe one more question. Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering if any of you have ever tried your hand at fan fiction, new stories about established characters in other movies or other novels.
Well, we don't like that term, but I like the term revisionist fiction. But a lot of my books are revisionist, where I take established characters and so forth and rework them in some way. Brady is working on a whole collection, which we're going to publish next year, which are revising Hemingway stories to some degree or another. So, I haven't written what I think of as fan fiction, but, we certainly dabble with taking established narratives and established characters and then kind of doing our own thing with them. Also, I compare it to like bands doing cover versions of classic songs. They're not trying to make them better or add another song to the Rolling Stones repertoire, but they just respect it so much they enjoy kind of manipulating it and playing with it. Jim writes some great Vonnegut revisionist work. What's your thought on revisionist work and why you enjoy writing it and that kind of thing?
Well, actually, I think doing fan fiction, there was a time that you could publish Vonnegut fan fiction legally, and what you realize is you had to know the source material so well, so much better than you might if you were just responding to it, like a literary sense, really. So I think that was the real surprise to me, that you would know that source so much better by the end of writing fan fiction.
Right, yeah, absolutely.
I think Grant has a pseudonym where he's writing Buffy fiction. Grant. You never know when you get someone to admit. He just
hit him with it.
Come at him.
Yeah, bright lights, the whole bit. Yeah,
Dude,
yeah.
what's the Buffy story?
Well, I really want to thank again Jim for being here. I'll mention Jim and Jeremy Schraffenberger are also 12 Winters Press authors. I'm very proud to have published their work as well. And so we'll be sticking around for a few more minutes here, but thank you all very much for coming out tonight and for your questions and for paying some attention. Appreciate it.